Okay, so I think let's get started. So hello everyone. This is Song Gao. I'm the current CPGIS president. So on behalf of the CPGIS Educational Committee, especially Chair Dr. Qiushen Wu, I would like to welcome you to join the CPGIS Educational Webinar on Geospatial Big Data Analytics series. So today it's our great honor and pleasure to have Dr. Mingshu Wang and to share his expertise on the topic of urban polycentricity and the city performance. And before he starts, please allow me to briefly introduce Professor Mingshu Wang. So Professor Wang is currently a senior lecturer, so equivalent to associate professor in the United States of the Geospatial Data Science at the University of Glasgow, United Kingdom. He is also associated scientist at the FOTU Resilience Engineering Center of the Netherlands. And he was also our CPGIS board member between 2019 and 2021. His research mainly integrates geospatial big data and computational methods to understand urban systems and development. And his work has received a lot of grants from World Bank, Dutch Research Council, Chinese Academy of Sciences, and Microsoft Azure. Currently, he is an editor of Asian Geographer and the associate editor of ISPRS International Journal of Geo-Information and Regional Studies, Regional Science. He also served on the editor boards for 5 other international journals, such as the CUS that we know in urban study and GIS science, which is a top tier journal. So without further ado, please join me welcome Dr. Mingshu Wang. Yeah, Dr. Wang, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for Professor Gao's introduction. Yeah, actually, with my tenure of the CPGIS from 2019 to 2021, actually, the COVID hit us, and I haven't contributed much to the CPGIS. So when Qiushen contacted me about this educational kind of webinar series, I'm very honored and humbled to be present some of my work, some of the work that my collaborators and myself that we are kind of working on for past couple of years. Let me share my screen first.
Sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, so today I'm going to kind of talk about not only one piece of the empirical research, but a series of research that my collaborators and I have been working on for past 7 or 8 years regarding urban polycentricity and city performance, the topic of that. So as Professor Gao mentioned, I'm Mingshu Wang from University of Glasgow in the United Kingdom. So actually, I'm going to cover 3 different topics today regarding the issue of urban polycentricity and city performances. First and foremost, I'm going to talk about some concepts of urban polycentricity, and then it's about the measurements. And lastly, but not least, I'm going to cover some of the applications of urban polycentricity with the emphasis on the application of geospatial data analytics. So first thing first about urban polycentricity, or we frame the process of polycentricity as polycentric urban development. So what is polycentric urban development? If you Google it, if you use Wiki kind of to look into the definition, you will see that there is some kind of ambiguity about what exactly polycentric urban development is. Actually, in the field of urban studies, there is no consensus yet about kind of any crystal clear definition about polycentric urban development. From the past couple of years of the empirical work, that I phrase kind of polycentric urban development as the following very simple and straightforward definition. That is, I don't care so much about what is the causes behind that at the moment. However, I consider any processes, any procedures that are causing multiple independent urban centers to become integrated as kind of the key for the polycentric urban developments. So here that the highlight points are the multiple independent centers, and the process should be integrated or as a procedure to have the centers to become integrated. Then a natural question is that, why do we want to care about it at all? What does it matter? Because from the theoretical perspective, that there are at least four possible outcomes, four possible positive outcomes associated with polycentric urban development. First and foremost is the economies of scale, that some stylized facts find that a polycentric urban structure is conducive to economic development compared to a monocentric one. The second one is the possible synergy of the complementarity, which is kind of built on upon the first purported benefit, that if a city have multiple independent urban centers, and each center specializing in some of different sort of sectors, then overall that the city can benefit largely because of the complementarity of different industry. And relatedly, that it has been found that the polycentric urban form is somehow conducive to an environment of the collaboration or cooperation of different government agencies or different administrative jurisdictions. Lastly, but not least, that the scholars from the environmental planning and urban planning cycle found that there is sort of the positive environmental externalities associated with polycentric urban form, such as less traffic congestion, better air quality, etc. Because of one of those potential synergy effects, that over the past 2 or 3 decades, polycentric urban development, we can find it from the literature as a theoretical construct. We can find it observed from remote sensor images or social sensing techniques as an empirical reality. And we can find it in different kind of the master plans or the development plan strategies as a normative development tool. So I'm just give you one of the examples of that. This is American 2050 kind of the regional planning, which essentially says that by the year of 2050, that the United States will probably have these 11 mega regions. So you can see that in each of these mega regions, it consists of more than one city, definitely. Probably it's interstate and across different states in each kind of the regions. For instance, the Northeast region, it literally stretches from Boston until somewhere in the Washington, D.C. or even the Northern Virginia part. So this is what we consider as an intercity polycentric urban development. If we zoom in to China, that we see that the multiple polycentric urban development is concurrently happening at or across different scales. On the one hand, if we see the left panel, that we see that within a city, this is just, I take the example from Shanghai, that within one city, you usually see that it's 1+X master plan, that one central city or major center, and plus a couple of the satellite towns or sub-centers. And if we look at the right panel of this slide, that we see that the polycentric urban development also happens at inter-city scale or regional scale. That's the National Economic and Social Development Plan has formulated 22 city regions across China. So if we look at the 22 city regions, they only occupy something like 20% of the land. It's kind of it produced like 70% of the China's GDP every year, with about half of the total population of China. So from here, from some examples, we see that indeed the concept of polycentric urban development is somehow fuzzy and ambiguous. That in turn, that's what we think that the concept, the definition of polycentric urban development or urban polycentricity is very important in any urban polycentricity research. So with that, regarding the concepts, we think the following 5 factors are very important for the folks who want to conduct polycentric urban research. First and foremost is a data source. Put differently, the polycentric in terms of what? Some scholars use population that we derive from the kind of globally available population grids. Some scholars use employment, GDP, nightlight remote sensor images, or the patent or citations as a representation of the knowledge. For whatever data sources you are using, a critical component concept is that to understand the data source and to understand that the polycentric urban development you are mentioning or you are referring to is a polycentric in terms of what? The secondly, as a unit of analysis, we do see that there is a proliferating literature about empirical analysis of polycentric urban development. Some covers of the Chinese cities, some covers the European cities or North American cities. And because of the context are different, and because of the data you're using are different, so what is the center becomes critically important. That how would you define a center? Because all those following metrics are associates or are functions of the way how you define the center, how you define the center. So the next is the identification of the existence or the lack of hierarchical differentiation. Because if we come back to the original concepts of the urban polycentricity, we want to measure the multiple independent urban centers to become integrated. We want to measure the process. Then how would you define or identify those kind of the hierarchies within your urban system is another very important aspect to be considered. And the next 2 are also very important in terms of the purported underlying processes or assumptions of what are the causes or what are the forces to kind of the driving factors of the polycentric urban structure. Lastly, but not least, the geography matters. The geographical scopes are very important because a city in China may be kind of 5 or 10 times larger than a city in the United Kingdom. And when we want to conduct polycentric urban analysis, that the geographical scope, meaning that how far does a region or city stretch out in your empirical setting, is also a very important factor to be considered in the urban polycentricity research. So with that 5 elements to have in mind, so over the past couple of years, we applied, we modified, and we developed a couple of different urban polycentricity metrics. Those are by no means as exclusive or authoritative measure. It's just a way to hopefully to give you some kind of idea about if someday you want to create your own urban polycentricity measures to conduct any empirical analysis. So when we consider to measure the level or the degree of urban polycentricity, we always wanted to come back to the definition that the multiple independent urban centers to become integrated. So here, the keywords, I underscore them, the multiple centers integrated. That boils down into two questions. Now, first one is that we want to be very careful about how we define, how we extract a center within the city or within the region, anyway, within the urban system. And also, we want to have a measure to balance or to consider the multiple and the integrated, the two words together. So we need to identify and to quantify the balance between those centers. So those are the two rules of thumb that we think for any urban polycentricity measures. And as a couple of examples, we empirically adopted the following 5 different measures in the empirical settings. The first one is very straightforward, the number of centers. If you formulate a way to systematically extract urban centers from your data, then the most straightforward way is just to count how many centers you have. The more the number of the centers, kind of the higher degree of the urban polycentricity. That is kind of very kind of self-evident that if a city has 3 centers versus the other city have 5 centers, given your consistent definition. And relatedly, that we can also use urban primacy, that we takes the proportion of the largest center. The larger center is in whatever the material is, the less degree of urban polycentricity of the urban system, because the single largest urban center occupies the majority of your urban system. And the third polycentricity measure can be adopted from the inequality indices. So if we look at the spatial segregation literature or the development economics literature, we can find tens of the inequality indices. And some scholars use those indices as a representation for urban polycentricity. I'm just taking one perhaps the most commonly used as Gini coefficients, just as an example. You can find, for instance, the delta, the theo, you name it, many variants of the inequality indices have been adopted for urban polycentricity research. The number 4 is that the which originally proposed by Berger and Meyers in 2010, that they take the advantage of the rank size distribution and to take the slope of any rank size distribution as the indices for the urban polycentricity. And the last one was originally proposed by Green in 2007. Basically, it takes a standard deviation methods that compare and contrast your empirical urban system with a hyperbolic theoretical urban system, and to count the deviation from the theoretically maximum. And you take the number and convert it into urban polycentricity research, into urban polycentricity metrics. So that because of the time, that if you are interested in the technical details about different individual indices, you are more than welcome to check individual papers. They have very detailed step-by-step instructions of how can compute the measures from any data that you use. One thing that, as a caveat, is that this is a very small kind of a empirical analysis we conducted. We found that the correlation, this is a simple Pearson's R, the correlation between the polycentricity indices, that because you use different measures and you treat the number of centers differently, that basically at a conceptual level, you conceptualize the urban system differently. And the correlation coefficients of different polycentricity scores can vary largely, meaning that ties again back to the concept. The concepts really matter, that how you conceptualize your urban system, how you construe your urban polycentricity measures are very important. Because without that, if we simply just run the numbers, play the data exercise, we may not get the result that we want. Okay, so as we mentioned that there are so many measures here, probably some ways forward are the following 4 bullet points. One is that again, we need to conceptualize what is urban polycentricity, and we need to design the indicators that should be consistent with your conceptualization of polycentricity. And also we need to consider the empirical and geographical context. And then it's oftentimes advised to provide multiple indicators to see whether they point to the similar pattern or they need some adjustment before directly use them. And relatedly, cautions are needed when setting any theoretical in-between critical values, or if you want to run any clustering analysis as a post hoc analysis of urban polycentricity measures. And it is imperative to thoroughly reflect on what constitutes a center, just in light of the research question at hand. So lastly, but not the least, the research question itself matters most. So with that, the third part, I'm going to show you some empirical evidence, some empirical work that we have been doing to connect the urban polycentricity and the certain performances with geospatial big data analytics methods. So here is a kind of a bundle of the empirical research we have been doing for the Chinese cities. So under the umbrella or background of the polycentric urban development, we adopted the concept of urban polycentricity, and we developed our own polycentricity metrics, which further down consists of the intra-city polycentricity and intercity polycentricity. And then we linked the polycentricity measure we developed with different aspects of city performance in terms of the economic performances, social performances, and environmental performances. So again, then we kind of concretize the definition of polycentricity, urban polycentricity, in our kind of Chinese empirical research. And we kind of materialize that as a polycentric city is a group of urban centers with relatively even distribution of importance. Okay, if the distribution of the importance is more evenly distributed, we consider that city as more polycentric. I'm going to come back to the definition of importance in a moment. So when this comes to the importance, you can literally use population, you can use employment, you can use the light intensity of the night light remote sensing, you can use the intensity of the GDP, you can use some sort of the NDVI-like of the measures to reflect the ecological importance, or you can even use the patterns, like say the R&D expenditure, etc. But here we use population as the content of the material to construct the urban polycentricity in our Chinese empirical work, not only because of the availability and accessibility of the landscape, high resolution graded data. More importantly, is that the population is a fundamental measure in the urban planning and regional planning. That a lot of the resources are allocated still based on the cap of population. So, and other kind of the advantages of the landscape data is that when it comes to the multi-level comparison, because of the raster format, it's more robust to the boundary change. If there's any kind of redefinition of the kind of the administrative kind of the relations. So how we extract the urban center, as that again that comes to the definition. We have defined that a cluster of population cells that are significantly denser than their surroundings, then we consider that as a center. So what we did is we extract the most populated grid from each of the for each city from the landscape images, and we combine the neighboring grids as cluster candidates, and we use some criteria to kind of refine or can the final candidates of the urban centers. And then starting from there, we compute the urban polycentricity indices. So before the computation of the urban polycentricity indices, we also manually check a number of the cities. We compare and contrast our empirical results with individual cities' master plan, and to see basically it's a tedious and labor-intensive manual interpretation process to see the kind of the validity of this process of these measures. So what we found that is starting from about 10 years ago, that the majority, about 58% of the Chinese cities, they are polycentric, meaning that they have at least 2 urban centers at the prefecture city level. And then now we have the urban centers, and now we have our way to formulate the urban polycentricity measures. And now it's a time to link the relationship between urban polycentricity and city performances. So we read a lot of the reports from the World Bank and the United Nations. And we boil down and summarize at least there are 3 components for any smart, sustainable, and resilient city. Now, if we want to say any city is sort of the smart or sustainable or resilient, it has at least incorporates the following 3 elements. The economic development is that city associated with greater labor productivity, or social development. What we further kind of boils down into if the city has more urban amenities and greater variety or diversity of the urban amenities. And the last one is the environmental protection. We focus on the carbon emission perspective. So because we mentioned that we want to focus on the multiscalar urban polycentricity. So for each city, we constructed the city region, the polycentric urban region associated with that city. So for each city, we searched for the radius of 100 kilometers as the hyperbolic city region for that city. So at the city level, as we mentioned before, that we can calculate the urban polycentricity indices at the city level. And for the hyperbolic city region, we also compute the urban polycentricity scores at INTRA-CITY level. Now we have all those polycentricity measures we want. Now, at the moment, we can run the empirical analysis. So what we did was to investigate the relationship between the multiscalar urban polycentricity and labor productivity. We extend the Douglas-Cope's production function by adding the emphasis of multiscalar polycentricity and their potential interaction effects. And what we found empirically in Chinese city is that the higher degree of intra-city monocentricity and higher degree of the inter-city polycentricity are associated with higher labor productivity. And we also kind of prove the borrow size theory which was proposed by Alonso in 1973, meaning that smaller cities next to a bigger one will benefit at greater level or magnitude than the larger cities. And we also find there is some very weak synergy effect between the different levels of urban polycentricity. And regarding the relationship between the intra-city polycentricity versus urban amenities, what we did was we took as the Dianping website, we got the point of interest information, and which was originally categorized into 14 classes. Then we pick the most ones with the urban consumption choices, the urban consumption diversities, and the totalities into the subsequent analysis. So this is the distribution of the the quantity and diversity of urban amenities in our study area. And what we did was to using regression analysis to see the associationship between the intra-city polycentricity and urban amenities. What we found is that a higher degree of intra-city polycentricity is associated with higher quantity of urban amenities. We also did a similar thing for the diversity of urban polycentricity. We found a similar result as the higher degree of intra-city polycentricity, the higher diversity of urban amenities, because we encountered the heterogeneity problem when we estimate the diversity of urban amenity. We use the two-stage least square estimator to rule out the possibility for the omission bias and the reverse causality issue in this research. And the last part is about the urban polycentricity versus the environmental protection. As mentioned, we use the carbon emission to illustrate that. So overall, that in the literature, we found we need to take a holistic strategy for the carbon emission or the carbon neutral in the future, namely the technological advancement, for instance, the advancement of the energy sector, and the market-based approach that, for instance, we use the carbon trade mechanism in the carbon market, and also that the urban design community is in favor of the sustainable urban form. So the question is very simple. Is polycentric urban form or urban polycentricity a sustainable urban form in terms of reducing carbon emission? We don't know at that moment. So we need a series of the empirical analysis. So that research was back about 5 years ago. At that time, there were 3 different regionally available carbon emission data products that covers mainland China. So we use some statistics analysis to pick the one that is more consistent and reliable and more applicable for our empirical analysis. In the end, we chose the fossil fuel data assimilation system product, which was a collaboration between the Purdue University and Arizona State University. We use that as the carbon emission sources for our empirical analysis. So in our initial analysis, we use a total number of 104 Chinese cities. We only consider the total carbon emission, and we only consider that 1 year results. What we found is that the polycentric urban form was associated with more carbon emission. However, the compact urban form was associated with less carbon emission. And there's a significantly size and wealth effect towards carbon emission. But later on, we refined the results by adding more directions. First thing, we deconstruct the total emission by different sector, and we only consider the direct residential emissions in the following study. And we increased our sample size from 104 cities into 271 cities. And we enlarged the time span from 2010 only, that we expanded that into 3 years and in the every 5 years interval. So by doing that, we find that the polycentric urban form is associated with less direct residential carbon emissions. And the results associated with compact urban form is consistent. And what we found is also the shrinking cities, they actually are associated with more carbon emissions. So with that, I'm going to give you a quick summary about our the bundle of the empirical analysis about urban polycentricity versus city performances in China. So what we find in the Chinese empirical city is that the polycentric urban developments are concurrently happening at intra-city and intercity scale. What we found is intra-urban monocentricity and inter-urban polycentricity. They are associated with better urban economic performances. We also find the effect of borrow size and weak synergy effects of polycentric urban developments. What we found is also the higher level of intra-urban polycentricity, the more quantity and also the diversity, the higher diversity of the urban amenities. Lastly, but not least, we find a higher level of intra-urban polycentricity is associated with less residential carbon emissions. And in contrast, the compact urban form is associated with both less total emission and residential carbon emissions. So at this moment, we have our revisit or the reconsideration of the concept or the definitions of polycentric urban development. We also have reviewed and developed and adopted different polycentricity measures. And we have systematically investigated the urban systems within China. And starting from the coming slides, I'm showing you some case studies that's beyond China. However, the theories and the methods that we use are still derived from the previous analysis. The first empirical analysis, or more recent analysis, is in the United States. And what we want to investigate is the relationship between urban polycentricity and traffic congestion. So on the one hand, we use the total annual excess fuel consumption as the way to measure the traffic congestion. What we did is we took the 98 urban areas in the contiguous United States. We took 10 years from 2001 to 2011, and we want to see that relationship between the urban polycentricity and traffic congestion. Here, we adopted the measure number 2, the urban primacy index, which is represented by largest patch index. Here, in the polycentricity, we consider the importance as the urban, the urban land. So what we found that is the more monocentric urban core were associated with less traffic congestion, and also a dominant patch of developed open space. They helped moderate the congestion, but to a very lesser degree. And another empirical example beyond urban China is a recent study conducted by one of my PhD students, Wu Cai, in the case of Singapore. And the research question is that if we can formulate different development strategy, in what kind of the development strategy, meaning creating more job opportunities, in which of the spatial configuration of the employment distribution is more conducive to a more urban, polycentric urban structure. In order to do that, we collect the data of population and commercial floor space and public transport flow at the traffic analysis zone level in the city of Singapore. And we employ different urban policy scenarios regarding different distribution of job spatially in the city. And we constructed a spatial interaction network with community detection algorithms to see that how different allocation of the job will conducive to the both the functional and the morphological aspects of the polycentricity. So in this the experiments, we formulate 4 different methods to allocate newly added jobs, employment opportunities spatially. And our key message is that, so we can, with different policy simulation scenarios, we can compare the multi-dimensional polycentricity with the current level of the scenario. Then we can make another planning or decision support tool to stakeholders regarding the urban polycentricity. So that's all for my presentation. Most of the work I presented have published already. Feel free to check this one of those papers, and I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions. And just I think that the urban polycentricity research will be kind of more promising with the aid or the availability of the computational resources and the variety and availability of new forms or different forms of the data. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wang. Yeah. So now I think we can turn to the question and answer session. So, and from the audience, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to type in the chat room, or if you can unmute yourself, please also, yeah, feel free to unmute yourself to ask questions. So maybe people are typing and thinking, I can start. So Dr. Wang, and yeah, so very impressive work from actually your series of papers about the urban intra-urban polycentricity. I wonder because most of their measures are based on either the population density or population or the amenities like the points of interest or the diversity. I wonder whether you also consider like some of those transportation networks, or because those are physical infrastructures that's actually maybe constrain the humans' movement around the city. So I wonder how that if I would assume if they are more connected by the transportation, maybe the residential distribution may not that matter. But yeah, this is just my limit thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, thanks, Professor Gao, for the question. I think that with the availability and accessibility of the more granular data, definitely we can have new insights. We will know more about the internal urban structure at the community level, at the neighborhood level. Unfortunately, that the adaptability will be an issue, especially in the European context, with the kind of the GDPR thing, that the detailed data or the finer kind of scale data, even though it's available, they may not be accessible because of the privacy concern and the regulation concern. So that's is something that I'm really struggling with the kind of the detailed, more granular data. But when the data has become available and accessible, definitely it will, I can imagine it will kind of urge a new year in terms of the pattern that we can kind of extract in terms of the frequency, increment the kind of the frequency of the pattern we can get.
Great, thank you. So we do have one question from the audience. I think whether maybe Jiarong, yeah, if you want me to read for you, yeah, Mingshu, you can also see a question.
Yeah,
so
yeah, I can see.
Yeah, I think the question is about the size of the city center, also whether this also matters, and have you considered that in your research?
Right. So I think this is another very excellent question. That's as mentioned, that the city itself, the context of city matters, and at the same time, the size of the city center also matters. One of those actually a strand of literature to use primarily use the urban primacy indices, which is a simple index that takes the number or the portion of the importance of the largest urban center versus the totality, the total numbers of all the centers. So that's, long story short, that's one of those urban polycentricity measures organically take the size of the city center into the calculation. And other research that we use kind of some definition of some kind of the threshold to define or to reflect the city, the potential impact of the city center. For instance, in some of our work, we use the urban primacy indices. In some of the work, we kind of categorize cities into different clubs or groups, and we conduct the analysis and the discussion within group. So definitely the size of the city center matters, and there are different strategies to handle the potential impact of the city center.
Great. I think another question is from the audience is, what are your favorite tools to use in your workflow? And then after that, I think we can back to also, I think I saw Ye Tian, he has a question, he raised his hand. So I think you can answer one question and then back to the audience.
Okay, so what are your favorite tools to use in your workflow? So I'm a Python user, so that's, I try to use Python whenever I can. Yeah, so that's, but I think that for most analysis, that the multiple tools or the kind of scripting language, roughly they will provide the same results, or they can do the same thing for you. So I wouldn't think that the tool itself is a barrier for the analysis.
Okay, I think, yeah, Tian, please feel free.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gao, for hosting the presentation, and thank you, Dr. Wang. It's a really good presentation. So I noticed that in your research, you covers a lot of cities in the United States and in China. As we all know, the driving force for the urban development in China or in the United States are sometimes totally different. You know, in China, the development of the cities are mostly by the policy of the government. But in the United States, you know, it is a federal country. Each state has their own policy of the urban development. So as you have the different research area or cities in the United States or in China, even in the United Kingdom in future, so have you ever considered what are the driving forces of the polycentric development in different countries? Maybe it's a really interesting topic to let other people know how the polycentric development be developed in different countries. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for Dr. Tian. So actually in those, in our empirical analysis, empirical work papers for Chinese polycentric urban development, we listed refutable hypothesis and aiming at exactly at what you mentioned, that the underlying kind of the paths and the driving forces for the urban polycentric structure. In a number of papers that we mentioned that, and we use the driving factors and the theories in Chinese development and urban economic theories to formulate the refutable hypothesis. So long answer short is yes, we did consider that, and we find that it's meaningful and interesting to understand the development path for the basically any urban structure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, I think we'll have maybe 3 more questions. Yeah, depending on time. So maybe you can, I think the next one, I think from, yeah, we try to answer more audience as most as possible. So I think it's from Rachel Perez. I think more about the polycentricity measures. I think, yeah, somehow related to the previous question. Yeah, the proximity in addition to the size of the population to the centers.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Raphael. Yeah. Thank you for your yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah. Unfortunately, for my empirical analysis, we did not consider the geographical proximities within different centers at the moment. But I know that some of the other scholars, they use the kind of some cost measure that derives from the distance, either as a pre-selection criteria for centers. For instance, some of scholars, they set, I make it myself, like say 5 kilometers, I'll say, you only consider that any subcenters within X kilometers towards the main center as a center candidate. Or some researchers use the basically inverse distance as a cost to weight the relative contribution to each subcenter. Yes, definitely. I think there are kind of advantages and benefits to add the proximity between centers as an element in computing the kind of the urban polycentricity measures.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wang. I think, yeah, actually the following 2 questions, they are somehow related. So both are about, in your work, it's more about the city polycentricity and then the performance. So they are actually wondering about other relationships between the urban form and then like maybe air pollution, like dry carbon emission, and the diversity of their amenities. I think maybe you can answer them together. Yeah.
Okay, so so what we found from our hypothesis for the relationship between the urban polycentricity and the congestion, or like say the carbon emission, is mostly still one of the pathways, potential pathways, is still from the kind of commuting trips, the job housing balance or imbalance issue. That the one thing that if let's say, long story short, is that if everyone that lives in the suburban residential center, then if the job, the employment concentration is still concentrated in the city center, then doing a kind of a regular day, that because of the access travel, the kind of the access, the commuting trip, that that people are towards the same direction at the same time, and vice versa, that will cause the actual time consumed within the city and during the congested time, that the carbon emission from the automobile is higher than the regular one. But at the same time, we can argue if we have the perfect match for the employment, we have a decentralized employment distribution and decentralized the residential opportunities. So everyone just have their own kind of 15 minutes working commuting trip. Then as for a city as a whole, that the total carbon emission that may be kind of much less than the other scenario. So there are different basically conflicting hypotheses and competing theories whether or not one particular urban structure is kind of as towards more carbon emission or less carbon emission And I think this is the interesting time or interesting kind of opportunity for empirical analysis to come to play, to see whether in one particular geographical context that which theory or which hypothesis stands out versus the other one.
Okay, yeah, great. I think now time is up. I think I'd like to thank you everyone for your participation, and let's thank Dr. Wang for sharing their insights and the lecture again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, just a quick reminder. Yeah, the last educational webinar on geospatial big data analytics will be in about 2 weeks. So we'll have another speaker from UK again, and Dr. Zhong Chen from UCL. So looking forward to see you again. Yeah, bye-bye. Have a nice day.
Okay, bye-bye.